Okay, folks, well, after a couple of weeks of harvest, we're returning this week to Luke's Gospel and the sections of it that the lectionary gives us. And this week it's Luke chapter 17 and verses 5 to 10. The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." He replied, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it will obey you. Suppose one of you has a servant ploughing or looking after the sheep. Will he say to the servant when he comes in from the field, 'Come along now and sit down to eat'? Won't he rather say, 'Prepare my supper, get yourself ready, and wait on me while I eat and drink? After that, you may eat and drink'? Will he thank the servant because he did what he was told to do? So you also, when you have done everything you were told to do, should say, 'We are unworthy servants. We have only done our duty.'" There is a controversial personality type test called the Myers-Briggs type indicator. Broadly speaking, it locates a person in one of 16 different personality types. And I once came across a document that contained a slightly facetious one-line prayer for each of the 16 Myers-Briggs personality types. There is someone I know for whom this would be the prayer: "Lord, help me to relax about insignificant details, beginning tomorrow at 11:41 and 23 seconds a.m. Someone else I know would probably own this prayer: "God, help me to take things more seriously, especially parties and dancing." And then there's someone I'm close to for whom I think their prayer would be this one: "God, help me to keep my mind on one, oh look, a bird, thing at a time." I suppose you want to hear mine. I'm not sure I should tell you, but it's this: "Lord, keep me open to others' ideas, wrong though they may be." Well, when I read today's passage from Luke, I had a sense that it was a bit like that previous prayer. "God, help me to keep my mind on one, look, there's a bird, thing at a time." Because the passage flits from one thing to another, like some people do in their conversations. It starts with the subject of faith, but before you know it, the passage is about servanthood. And even within the parable about the servants, you start off in it as the master, but you end up as the servant. Now, not for the first time, our problem is that the lectionary has taken these verses out of context. These verses belong in a part of Luke's Gospel where discipleship is being discussed. Luke isn't necessarily ordering the material chronologically here. He is collecting some of Jesus' basic teaching on what it means to be a disciple. So you could say that today's reading is part of what our American friends would call a Discipleship 101 course. This is an introduction to discipleship. It's discipleship basics. And the two basic elements of discipleship taught in this module are faith and servanthood. So let's think about them. Firstly, faith. The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." He replied, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, You can say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it will obey you. Well, just taking these verses as they stand, the apostles ask for more faith, and Jesus says, well, you've got to start exercising the small amount of faith you already have. And I think that's important. Some of us just sit there waiting for God to do all the work of increasing our faith, when Jesus tells us to go and get on with the faith we already have, and that if we put that into practice, then things will happen. In other words, you don't build up muscle without exercise. So exercise the faith you already have, even if it doesn't seem like much, and over time it will grow and strengthen. As the missionary pioneer to China, Hudson Taylor, put it, you do not need a great faith, but faith in a great God. And for some of us, it's time to get out of the pews and start putting our faith into action. We have that faith in a great God, for we believe amazing things about our God. It is time to take what we hear and sing about on Sunday morning and put it into practice on Monday morning. All the stuff, though, about a mulberry tree being uprooted and planted in the sea is more of Jesus's cartoon language to make a point. I don't think he's wanting us to go and just rearrange trees by putting them in the sea. And one writer puts it this way: the best analogy I have heard is that faith is like a tow rope used by one car to pull another car up a hill. If the second car won't move, then it's no good attaching a stronger rope. What matters is the vehicle the rope is attached to. In a similar way, it is not the strength of our faith that is the issue. The question is, who is our faith placed in? So, you have to take the handbrake off the second car. Even if you don't need a tow rope to move a car, you still have to take the brake off and start moving if you are to steer the car. For us, this means we need to get on with those basic actions of faith and not just sit around waiting for something magical to change us. Only when we start moving with the actions of faith will our faith move and grow. In fact, although, as I said, Luke puts a lot of different pieces of Jesus' teaching about discipleship together in this part of his gospel, there is a real possibility that the apostles' request for increased faith does relate to what Luke has mentioned immediately before our passage. Because you could translate the words slightly differently, not so much, Lord, increase our faith, as Lord, give us this kind of faith. So what kind of faith? It must be what immediately precedes it. So what does come immediately before those words of the apostles that our reading began with? Well, the answer is some teaching of Jesus about what to do when people sin against us. First, says Jesus, you rebuke them. You see, Jesus wasn't a doormat. There's nothing wrong in saying to somebody, you wronged me. Then, says Jesus, if they repent, you forgive them. And even if they continue to sin but keep repenting each time, you still go on forgiving them. Well, the apostles realize I think, that to rebuke someone for their sin, but then forgive them when they are repentant, requires more faith than they presently have. I mean, we know that a couple of the disciples fancied calling down fire from heaven on those villages that opposed Jesus. And we know that in the Garden of Gethsemane, Peter wielded a sword. They know they need more faith in order to forgive. And Jesus says, you have a little bit of faith, start with that. As you exercise it, your faith will grow. Take the handbrake off. Begin to move. Where is God calling us to release the brakes on our faith? Is it in forgiveness? Or is it in some other area? So the first part of our module on Discipleship 101, faith. The second part, servanthood. What do we make of Jesus' little parable about the servant who works when the master is away, but cannot rest when the master comes home? Now, when you hear about masters and servants here, please put aside all your images of Downton Abbey with the team of servants downstairs all doing their different jobs, because in this parable, you've got one servant doing everything. One moment, he's out doing farming duties, either ploughing or looking after the sheep. Then back home, he is both the chef and the butler, as he takes care of his master's evening meal. That's one demanding job description, isn't it? So at first hearing, this sounds like a recipe for relentless hard work. And not only that, what do we make of the conclusion, where Jesus says that servants should simply say, we are unworthy servants, we have only done our duty? How do words about unworthy servants go down, say, with someone who suffers from low self-esteem? Isn't that contradictory then to all the notions of grace and welcome and love that God has for sinners that Jesus taught 2 chapters before in the parable of the prodigal son? Well, I think it's important to realize that Jesus is actually addressing a different concern here. Jesus is making sure that we don't enter into Christian discipleship as if it's a ticket to prosperity and status, let alone celebrity. No Christian belongs on a pedestal. Only Jesus does. The point is this: we have a simple calling as disciples. It is to do what pleases our Master, Jesus. In Ephesians chapter 5 verse 10, Paul tells his readers to find out what pleases the Lord, with the assumption that when they have found out what pleases the Lord, they will then go and do it. That's our calling here in today's reading, according to Jesus. In a world where we are encouraged to please ourselves, our goal as Christians is to please Jesus. We have 4 Gospels that tell us what pleases Jesus. There are plenty of things we can get along with, many of them the commonplace actions of everyday life, with the important rider of how we go about them in contrast to other people. It isn't that difficult to know a lot of the things that please Jesus. They are there, plain as anything, in the Gospels. Perhaps our problem is best stated by Mark Twain. He said, "It was less the parts of the Bible he didn't understand that troubled him, and more the parts of the Bible he did understand that bothered him." I suspect it's like that for many of us with the teaching of Jesus. There are some very plain and challenging elements to his teaching, and where we wished he had said something else so we didn't have to comply. But they don't. We get the difficult stuff to do, as well as the straightforward. Does any of us then face a dilemma where, if we're honest, the choice between claiming our own rights or privileges or status on the one hand and pleasing Jesus is on the other? Are we facing a choice between those two things, our status or pleasing Jesus? For me, I remember a friend of mine who told me that he knew he could not offer for the ministry until he was married. And when I heard him say that, I wasn't in the ministry and I was single. And when I did start thinking God was calling me to the ministry, I said, well, Lord, I don't really want you to call me until I'm married, till I have the support of a wife. But you see, God wouldn't let me put conditions on how I responded to what he wanted of me. My job was to do what pleased him. And so I went through my ministerial training as a single man. I spent my first 9 years in the ministry as a single man. Only then did I marry. Do any of us say things like this to Jesus? I'll only do X for you if you do Y for me. The thing is, we don't get to set the terms, because we follow the one who gave up all those rights and privileges he had as the eternal Son of God to serve and to bring salvation. How, when Jesus did that, can we cling on to status in preference to serving him? So in conclusion, this basic course in discipleship is one where in this module Jesus issues two simple but important challenges to us. Firstly, we need to stop waiting for God to dispense the spiritual equivalent of fertilizer on our faith if it is to grow. Instead, we need to exercise the faith muscles we already have if we want our faith to grow. We need to get moving in faith if we are to get up to speed. And secondly, we have a simple mission in life, which is to find out what Jesus likes and then to please him by putting it into practice. We cannot allow our pride to get in the way. The call to be servants is paramount, and it shapes everything we do. So how are we doing with our discipleship basics? And that's where I leave my thoughts with you this week. May the Holy Spirit show us where we need to start exercising our faith muscles and where we need to just say, Jesus, I want to please you, regardless of my rights. God bless you all this week as you seek to be a disciple of Jesus. Bye-bye.